Welcome back. I'm coming to you on day 13 of a war that was supposed to be swift, surgical, and decisive. And today, for the first time since the bombs started falling, Benjamin Netanyahu held a press conference. What he said was carefully constructed to project strength and dominance, but what he accidentally admitted tells a completely different story. Stay with me, because once you hear it, the entire framework of this conflict shifts. Let's start with the optics alone. The Prime Minister of Israel, leading what his government calls the most consequential military campaign in the country's history, held that press conference on a Zoom call, not from a podium, not from a war room, from a screen. And while he was still speaking, air raid sirens activated across central Israel. His own military confirmed a new barrage of incoming ballistic missiles from Iran, the sixth salvo of that day alone. Netanyahu kept talking. He talked about crushing the regime. He talked about eliminating Iran's leadership. He talked about Israel as a global superpower. But the sirens were going off in real time. You cannot script over that image. Now, let's fact-check the opening claims of this war, because the public record matters here. In the first week, the IDF announced it had destroyed 300 Iranian missile launchers. Officials on both sides cited a 70% drop in Iranian fire directed at Israel. Reports claimed that roughly three-quarters of Iran's launch capability had been wiped out. The message from Washington and Tel Aviv was coordinated and consistent. Overwhelming force, mission nearly accomplished, Iran on its knees. That was the narrative being sold. Now measure that against what Netanyahu himself said 13 days in. He told reporters that Iran had been burying its missile capabilities and nuclear assets deep underground. He said that had Israel and the United States not acted when they did, those weapons would have become, in his own word, immune to any attack within months. Read that back carefully. That is not a leader describing an enemy that has been defeated. That is a leader explaining why the enemy is still shooting. He is telling you, on the record, that there are assets the coalition cannot reach. He is confirming the campaign has structural limits. The word immune is not the language of victory. It is the language of a ceiling that has already been hit. A journalist reporting from Ramallah flagged this in real time, calling it a stark contrast to everything officials had been saying since the opening strikes on February 28th. And the facts on the ground confirm exactly that contradiction. On March 12th alone, 6 separate ballistic missile salvos came in from Iran. Simultaneously, Hezbollah launched over 200 rockets from Lebanon into central Israel in what the IDF itself described as a coordinated joint operation. A missile struck a home in Haniel. A rocket hit a residential building in Beina, injuring civilians. Schools across Israel remain closed. The country is still operating under a national state of emergency. 2 weeks into a war, Netanyahu told Fox News on day 4 would be quick and decisive. Now I want to bring your attention to something that deserves far more coverage than it is getting, because it speaks directly to the vulnerability at the core of Israel's defense architecture. The deadliest single event of this conflict so far did not happen on a battlefield. It happened in Beit Shemesh, approximately 18 miles from Jerusalem. An Iranian ballistic missile hit a communal shelter inside a synagogue. 9 civilians were killed, dozens more were wounded. 2 Israeli interceptors were fired at that incoming warhead. Both missed. The sirens in the area did not activate in time to give residents the standard 90-second warning window. Here is why that matters structurally. Iran's ballistic missiles can reach Israel in roughly 10 minutes from launch. The entire Israeli civil defense model is built on 3 pillars: early detection, timely alerts, and functional intercepts. At Beit Shemesh, all 3 failed at the same time. That is not a technical glitch. That is a simultaneous collapse of the architecture Israel has spent decades and billions of dollars constructing. When the interceptors miss and the sirens lag, the shelter becomes a trap rather than protection. Every defense planner watching this conflict should be taking note of what happened in that synagogue. Let's turn now to the regime change question, because this is where the gap between public messaging and classified intelligence becomes most alarming. Netanyahu told reporters that one of his core objectives is to create conditions for the Iranian people to expel their regime. A journalist then asked him directly whether he could guarantee that outcome. He could not. He admitted openly that he cannot promise 100% that the regime will fall without the Iranian people themselves rising up. He told Iranians, and I am paraphrasing here, that help is on the way, but ultimately it is up to them. Pause on that. 13 days into the most expensive American military engagement since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the leader directing the strikes is publicly acknowledging that the military operation alone cannot deliver the stated political objective. That is not a minor caveat. That is the central premise of the entire campaign collapsing under questioning. And it gets worse when you hold that statement against the intelligence record. A classified report completed by the National Intelligence Council in February 2026, before the first bomb dropped, concluded that neither limited airstrikes nor a prolonged military campaign would be likely to produce regime change in Iran. The National Intelligence Council is not a peripheral body. It represents the unified consensus of every major American intelligence agency. Since that initial assessment, multiple follow-up analyses have reached identical conclusions. Sources have described a consistent body of intelligence, finding that the regime retains control and is not in serious danger of collapse. The most recent of these assessments was completed just days before Netanyahu's press conference. Even a senior Israeli official privately acknowledged to Reuters that there is no certainty this war leads to the fall of the clerical government. The regime change argument falls apart further when you examine what actually happened after Supreme Leader Khamenei was killed in the opening strikes on February 28th. Iran did not descend into chaos. The Assembly of Experts convened within days and selected Mojtaba Khamenei, the dead leader's son, as his successor. Multiple analysts describe him as more hardline than his father. His first statement as Supreme Leader was read on Iranian state television. He did not appear on camera, which raises legitimate questions about his physical security, but the content of the statement was unambiguous. He vowed to avenge Iranian blood and declared explicitly that the Strait of Hormuz would remain a tool of pressure against the West. The regime did not fracture. It promoted from within. It issued commands. It kept launching. When a reporter asked Netanyahu what fate awaited Mojtaba Khamenei and Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem, his answer was a public assassination threat delivered casually. He said if he were an insurance agent, he would not write either man a life insurance policy. That line dominated headlines. But ask what it actually reveals. 13 days in, the two figures whose removal was supposedly central to the operation's goals are both still alive. The regime is intact, the command structure is functioning, and the Prime Minister's response is a soundbite rather than a strategy. On Hezbollah, Netanyahu was confronted with something he cannot explain away. A reporter reminded him that in 2024, he publicly told the Israeli people that military strikes had set Hezbollah back 20 years. The reporter then asked the obvious question, if that was true, how is Hezbollah currently firing 200 rockets a day into Israel? Netanyahu did not answer directly. He reframed, arguing that the original projections were catastrophic and that Israel's aggressive action prevented the worst. But then he said on the record that Hezbollah continues to be capable of attacking Israel. The sitting prime minister, conceding that a force he declared neutralized 2 years ago, is conducting sustained defensive operations against his country right now. Now to the financial and humanitarian reality of what this war is actually costing. The Pentagon confirmed to the Senate Armed Services Committee that the first 6 days of operations alone cost over $11.3 billion. That makes this the most expensive American military engagement since the opening phase of the Iraq invasion. American gasoline prices have climbed 17% since the conflict began. Brent crude surged from approximately $73 per barrel before the war to over $100 within the first 10 days. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed for nearly 2 weeks. At least 16 separate attacks on commercial vessels have been documented. 8 seafarers are dead. Roughly 150 vessels are stranded. Iran has planted approximately a dozen naval mines in the waterway. Inside Iran, the human cost is devastating. The Iranian Red Crescent reported nearly 800 killed. Human rights organizations put the actual figure above 2,400. Iran's deputy health minister stated that 31 major hospitals have been damaged and 12 are completely non-functional. In Lebanon, 687 people have been killed since Israel expanded its campaign, 98 of them children. And through all of this, the political calculation that partly drove Netanyahu into this conflict is not paying off. A poll released during his press conference showed him losing seats in projected election outcomes. His corruption trial continues. Israel's Pardons Department reviewed his pardon request and found it does not meet the legal criteria. Donald Trump has publicly called Israeli President Isaac Herzog weak and pathetic for not issuing the pardon, and Trump himself has told reporters he wants this war finished soon, asking publicly, when do we stop? Netanyahu needs the conflict to extend long enough to reach Election Day from a position of strength. Trump wants it over. Their strategic clocks are running in opposite directions. Here's where the facts leave us. Iran is still launching ballistic missiles at Israel 13 days into a campaign designed to stop them. Netanyahu admitted he cannot guarantee regime change. U.S. intelligence assessed before the first strike that regime change was unlikely. The new supreme leader is issuing orders and vowing revenge. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Hezbollah is firing 200 rockets a day. 7 Americans are dead. The war has cost over $11 billion in under a week. The stated objective was the fall of the Iranian government. 13 days in, the government is standing, the missiles are flying, and no one on any side has been able to define what a realistic ending actually looks like. We will keep verifying. We will keep fact-checking. Stay with us.